Hello, and welcome to the podcast, The Other Woman and the Wife, where we discuss why infidelity exists and what we can learn from it. In today's episode, I am joined by a real beacon of light within the community. She goes by the name Grace, and she and I collided on TikTok. She was one of the founding members of the community. Isn't that right, Grace?
That is right.
I am so grateful for you. Grace, you were one of the founding members and you quickly became, I'll say, one of the greatest contributors to the community. And I thank you for that. I know a lot of the women inside of the circle look up to you and they see you as a shining example of what their life could be if they made some difficult choices.
I appreciate that. And I will thank you for the community because it became a very large part of my healing as I was extracting myself from my marriage and going on the year healing journey that I went on. And I found you probably halfway through that, and it absolutely became a very big piece of my healing.
I love you. I love you for that. And for a really long time, I was like, what is this healing word that people keep talking about? And I found this quote the other day that really kind of changed my life in kind of understanding why conversation is so healing. And it said that neurons that fire together build new pathways together. And basically, if you're trapped by the way that you think about life currently, the only way out of that is by assessing why you think the way that you currently think and what you can do about it.
Right. And sharing experiences is huge. And an affair is so isolating. And you don't want to share that with anyone because you don't want to be judged or you don't want that information to be found out. And I couldn't share that information with the closest people in my life. And to finally have a space where I could talk openly about my experience and realize that I wasn't the only one and that there were many women out there that were struggling with the same thing. And to share those experiences was huge for me.
That's so good to hear. All right. So let's go ahead and dive in. Grace, can you tell us a little bit about your story? Maybe just how long you've been married, what your experience in an affair was like?
Sure. I met my husband very young. I was 17 and he was 16 when we met each other. We were both working at the grocery store at the time and lived in the same neighborhood. And we met, we started dating like right at that time. There was a short period that we broke up. And then by the time we were 19 and 20, we were engaged, we married. I was 21 when we married, and we moved to a different city where we decided we wanted to begin a family and kind of went from there. And at that point, I was head over heels in love with him. I thought he was everything that I ever wanted in a spouse. And we very quickly started working on having a family. We had a miscarriage early on and then had our first daughter when I was 24. And I would say from that point, I think there's something when you become a parent, it kind of changes your priorities a little bit and you see things very differently. And you suddenly see the contribution from the other person as maybe not being what it should be as far as if we're going to continue to move this forward and be a family. So I would say probably about 5 years into our marriage was when we probably hit our first real rocky point. And I was seeing at that point that there was maybe this wasn't the right fit for me, but I did not know how to communicate that to him. And, when I look back on that now, I've done a lot of work on codependency. And I can see that now that very early in our relationship, those signs were already there. And I was already shoving down my feelings and what I needed to avoid the conflict and to make sure that he had what he wanted and I was putting his needs ahead of my own. And that went on for a very long time. And I think that our marriage kind of had a pattern and we had very high highs and very low lows. And I would say every 3 to 5 years, we would hit that low. And that would be where I could no longer hold it in. And I would kind of blow things up and threaten to leave. And he would make lots of promises. And then we would have another baby. So we had three daughters, and they are, they're spread out a little bit. Our oldest is 30, our middle daughter is 24, and our youngest is going to be 17 this summer. So that period in between was where we would ride back up to the high, and then we'd come back down to the low again, and then get back on track and have another kid. So um,
Well, if you like riding roller coasters, it sounds like an excellent place to be.
it was not fun. It was not fun. So I had a really hard time like owning what I needed for myself. And so what I thought I needed to do was dig into personal development. I absorbed every book and podcast and everything that I could think of to fix myself because clearly I was the problem, right? In my mind, I was the problem. What can I do to make me better so that he will be better? Was this weird dynamic that I created in my head. So I did a lot of work to grow. And as I did a lot of work to grow and better myself, he stayed the same. And it created this large divide between us. And I would say, during that period, always loved him. I will say I still have love for him today. I don't love him as my partner. I love him as the man that I spent 31 years in a marriage with and had three beautiful daughters with, and we have all of this history together. We grew up together, but there's no way that I would want to be married to him going forward. And it took me a long time to get to the point where I felt like I could leave my marriage and my kids would be okay. There was an alcohol problem with him. He wasn't a raging drunk alcoholic that was, I would say, abusive, but he did drink every day to the point that he would pass out on the couch. And I was very concerned about my kids being in an environment where they didn't have a buffer if I was not there half of the time. So when I finally made the decision to leave, my youngest daughter was 15, and I felt like in a spot where she could take care of herself if she needed to when I wasn't there. So and it took me about 5 years of working with a therapist and really digging into codependency and understanding why I had the patterns in my life that I did and why I made the decisions that I did and why it was so hard for me to say what I wanted, what I needed, and actually honor what I needed instead of putting somebody else's needs ahead of mine.
For the listeners who wouldn't label themselves as codependent, because I think that there is some negative inference and aversion to claiming a label that you don't really want to have for yourself. Can you give us kind of a succinct definition or a way that you would articulate codependency?
I would. So I was referred to, somebody told me about Melody Beattie's book, Codependent No More. And I started listening to it on Audible, and I was like, holy shit, she's talking about me. So codependency takes place when one person believes it's their job to save another person by attending to all of their needs. A codependent person builds their identity around this purpose and takes on a self sacrificing role in the relationship. I was the fixer, I was the rescuer. I held all of the mental load in her family. I did probably 90% of the parenting. The other 10% of the parenting that he did, I would have to come in and smooth over the issues that it created with our kids. I was the financial provider for our family and then still the person that took care of everything in the house. So it was all of it fell on me. And it didn't matter how many times we had conversations about the fact that I needed help. Like, you've got to, I need you to step in and do some of these other things. It just never happened. So I would just do it instead of, I don't know, completely boycotting this up. I mean, at some point, somebody's going to clean this up, or I'm going to keep doing it, and then nobody's going to do it except me. So that was kind of how that laid out in our relationship. And, I would say is what led me to the affair. I would say that my affair was an escape from my reality that I did not have the tools at that point to make difference. And when my life got to be too much for me, That was my escape. And he was the spot where I felt completely safe and my nervous system was happy when I was with him and calm and at peace. And when I was at home and engaged with my husband, I felt like I felt like my skin was bubbling. I don't like the blood under my skin was bubbling all the time. It was constantly in that fight or flight scenario, waiting on the next thing that he was going to do that I had to clean up.
Mm.
So that's what led to the affair. And my affair partner was actually my brother in law. And we connected over I would say, the enmeshment and the kind of craziness of this family that we both became a part of, that on the outside looked pretty cool and normal. And then once you're in it, you're realizing the things that are actually happening. And you're like, that's not, this isn't, are you seeing this too? Is this what's happening? So, yeah, there were, some side conversations that happened. And then, this started in 2005. So next year it'll be 20 years ago.
Wow. Something you didn't plan that definitely occurred.
Definitely occurred. And I would say over that time, as I was writing those highs and lows of my marriage, I would say if you asked him, he would say that his weren't necessarily highs and lows, but maybe more just a normal low all the time. And kind of this, it is what it is. Kind of, this is my lot in life. This is what I chose. So now I have to accept what I'm in. And we tried, I would say, 3 different times over that 18-year period to actually leave our spouses to create a life together. And for one reason or another, it could have been me saying I can't do this. At one point, it was him saying he couldn't do it, and then things would break off for a while. There was about a 13 or 14-year period in there where we really said we're not going to do this. We need to stay committed to our spouses and our kids, raise our families, and we did that. And at that point, there was even, I mean, our families were still doing things together, which was this whole another odd dynamic because the feelings were still there. Just both of us had shoved them so far down and weren't acknowledging them. And I don't know, right or wrong, it made it harder for I think probably everybody involved. But 2 years ago, when I was finally at the point of ending my marriage, we were also at that point we were going to leave our spouses to be with each other. And he decided again that he needed to give his marriage, he owed it to her to give her one more try. So my marriage and the affair blew up at the same time. Literally, the weekend I moved out of my house was the weekend that the affair blew up, that we ended everything. So I went on a year healing journey. He and I had no communication for an entire year. And at that point, I never thought we were going to communicate again.
Did you have any communication with your husband at the time during that year?
Yes, because again, at that point, our daughter was 15. So
Mhm.
our custody arrangement with her is a little different. She's with me 12 out of 14 nights because she deals with a lot of anxiety, and her dad is a big trigger for her anxiety. So when she's going to school, I take her to school every morning. She sleeps here, but he gets her in the afternoons and he spends a few hours with her in the afternoons. So there's every day during the week an exchange that's taking place. And in the beginning, I would say it was still hard for me to not step into these codependent patterns. And I would be like, okay, well, we can have dinner together this night, like trying to show that we're still a family unit to our daughter. And it just never, to this day, he still wants us to be back in a relationship together. And like, you haven't been listening to me this whole time. Like, it's never going to happen. That part of our life is over.
Mhm.
Um, and as he continued to push on my boundaries that I created, and he wasn't used to that because I never had boundaries with him. Being the codependent person I was, you don't have boundaries with these people. So as I started creating boundaries, he had temper tantrums about them, and he still does. And every time he does, I push that. I make it stronger because when you behave that way around me, I'm going to continue to take away your access to me. So our communication has continued to dwindle and become smaller and smaller. I don't go into the house anymore. Like I pull up and I pick her up at the curb and at the
Ooh.
end of the driveway. And
Say that
um,
one more time. There are a ton of listeners who need to hear about that piece, about the not going into the house.
yeah, and it took me, like I said, it's been May will be 2 years since I told him that we were done. I was leaving. I moved out of our house in July. So this July will be 2 years that we haven't lived together. And I have, over that period, because we still see each other as much as we do, I have had to continue to say, it is no longer good for me to do this thing. And that was, I'm not coming here and having dinner with you. I'm not coming here to help you with things at the house. You can hire someone to do that. You're still living in the house. I'm taking care of my place. I'm not coming here to help you with these things. This is yours to take care of. I'm not coming into the house when I'm picking up our daughter. I will pull up and I will send her a text and let her know that I'm here. And these are things that I've continued over time to have to strengthen a little bit more to protect
Mhm.
my peace and my energy because he's a energy vampire and will suck all of it out of me if I allow him to. So he's still trying to tell me that we need to talk. I'm like, we don't need to talk. So I sent him a message last week and said, how about you tell me the topic that you would like to discuss? And I will let you know if I'm open to having a conversation.
Was there a certain moment in time where it was, like, very obviously blatant to you that he was kind of this energy suck, and you putting yourself in his presence was you allowing your energy to be sucked out of you?
Absolutely. I felt it when I was living in the house. Like I can remember when I would leave work to go home and I would start, the closer I got home, I would start feeling it in my stomach and kind of like dreading. It would take the long way home. I would drive down the beach to get home. It's adding 15 minutes to my drive so that I wouldn't get there any earlier. So I knew it then, but I don't know that I actually understood fully that this is what this was from. And when I moved out of the house and I have this little sanctuary that I have created for my daughter and I that is all us. It reflects our personalities, it's all light and airy, and we refer to it as the Zen garden. We have plants everywhere and there's natural light flowing in the house, and we absolutely love it. This is now my safe sanctuary place. So I feel so grounded and calm here. And then as soon as I'm in his presence, I feel it. Like and he doesn't even have to say anything. And if he comes here, my daughter's like, Mom, where's the sage? We need a sage after he leaves.
Would you say that securing yourself a safe place gave you the contrast that you needed in order to identify what was sucking the energy out of you?
I absolutely do. I absolutely do. It's easier for me now because I'm on the other side of it. But going into the divorce process, I was terrified. Like, I don't know, what does this look like? How do we do this? And my divorce was not easy because he refused to agree to anything because he didn't know. So $45,000 in legal fees later, finally divorced. And
How much was the wedding?
it, we got married in 1991. It was probably $3,500.
The way we have to invest in ourselves is a little bit backwards, but that's
Wow.
okay. We
Yeah. But honestly, I was like, it should not be this easy to get married. If it is this hard to get divorced, it should not be this easy to get married. Shouldn't be. It's been quite a wild ride for sure. But
Mhm.
anybody who's thinking about it, getting a divorce and the fear is the thing that's keeping you back, the only way to conquer that fear is to take those steps forward and do it. Take those steps forward.
I always tell people it's interesting listening to you speak because it's like most of my coaching clients are in the throes of having to decide if divorce is for them or not. And
Mhm.
I'm always like, what's something else? What's something smaller that scares you? And I will usually, whenever I have to do something that's like big and it scares me, I'll usually challenge myself with something small, like
Mhm.
telling the barista when they made my coffee wrong. I think I
Right.
said that on last week's episode. But usually, if I find myself in a moment of fear where I want something, but I'm afraid to get it for whatever reason, I'll usually
Mhm.
challenge myself with something small. So, what do you think is most helpful to you when you are kind of, I'll say, letting fear take the driver's seat of your life and make kind of those decisions for you?
Um, I think there were probably two things. I would challenge myself and I would journal about this. What do I want my life to look like a year from now? And what do I want my life to look like 5 years from now? And am I on the path to make that happen? And if I stay in this relationship, am I going to have the life that I want? And the answer was no. So I think that really kind of got me moving in the right direction. And then probably one of the most profound things that I learned from my therapist was two things can be true at the same time. It's not either or, because I knew I still had love for him and I loved our family. I mean, our kids are amazing. I loved our family. But the reality of that situation is I was the glue that kept our family together. And when we were doing family things together, our kids would be like, what's going on with dad? What's wrong with dad? Yeah, I don't know. I used to make excuses for him, and then I got to the point where I don't know what's wrong with your dad. So when you're going through that, one of the hardest things for me was mourning the loss of what I planned for my family for the future. Like my family, it looks different now than what I ever envisioned it was going to. So that was probably one of the hardest pieces for me. It wasn't really, divorcing him. It was losing that vision. But when you really think about it, you realize that vision wasn't your reality. The reality that you were in, it was never going to get you to that vision. So the two things can be true at the same time. I could have love for this man. And yes, that is true. It is also true that he is not the right partner for me and he is not a good fit for me. And I was losing myself in that relationship.
I love
So,
hearing you say all of this out loud. I get to read a
yeah,
lot of your stuff, and it really does land differently when it's with your voice. I love you for that. If you are the other woman in your relationship and you love this podcast, you would love the Other Women community. The Other Women community is a membership program designed to help other women just like you reclaim their relationship with themselves and heal from their affair. We provide a safe and supportive environment for you to open up and talk about your experiences. We give you the tools and resources you need to grow into an authentic, empowered individual. If you're ready to take the next step in your healing journey, head on over to theotherwomanandthewife.com/community to learn more about the membership and all it has to offer. I have another question for you. As far as infidelity is concerned, was adulthood the only season of life that I'll say like infidelity had an impact on you?
for me personally, or me taking that action, yes. So my mom was very young when she had me. My mom had me when she was 14 in 1969, when teenage pregnancy was not something that was acceptable. And her mom told her that she couldn't stay there. She couldn't live there anymore. So she got married to my biological father and went to live at his parents' house with them. So they were, I think he was 15 at the time. So 14 or 15 with a baby living in his parents' home. He worked for a shoe store. He became a shoe store manager. And my mom then got pregnant at 19 with my sister. So I was 5 years old. And at that point, he wasn't having an affair with someone that he worked with and told my mom that she needed to go back to her parents or her mom and her grandmother where she belongs. He was going to have this life with this new person. So I would say that was at a very young age, the first time that infidelity really touched my life. And he did marry her. They had 2 kids together, and we did not have a relationship for most of my life. I reached out to him when I was 35 or 36 and actually went and visited him. And we didn't sustain a relationship. Really, it was good for me to actually meet him and discuss some things with him. But I think infidelity probably was something that he continued to do throughout most of his life. They did get divorced and remarried other people, but he passed away probably about 8 years ago. And at the end of his life, they were living together. They weren't together as a couple, but they were living together.
I'm sorry, your biological mother and
My
biological father got back
biological,
together?
no, hit my biological
Oh,
father and the woman that he had the affair with when I was 5. Yeah.
wow.
So my mom, she was 19. She had a 5-year-old. She was pregnant with her second child. And she went back home to her mom and her grandmother. And who I referred to as my dad my whole life, showed up. He was actually a friend of my biological father. And he knew that he'd been cheating on my mom. And he knew that he liked my mom. And he showed up. And I think within 9 months, they were getting married, and he adopted my sister and I, and they went on to have 3 other kids together. So there's 5 of us, and they are still together now. But I will tell you, I learned my codependency from my mom because my
Mm.
mom, as wonderful as it sounds that he stepped in and took on these kids, she remained in that relationship and is still in that relationship now when it isn't really what she wanted. It isn't what was bringing her joy. And she tried to leave many times, and he would melt down and she would go back because that he was hurting, which is what I did many times. I think, I tried to leave my marriage probably 5 different times over the 31 years that we were together
Oh my
before I
god.
did it and it actually worked.
I I just, like, need to pause for a moment because whenever I think about, like, this business and what it affords women in general I think it allows women to make sure that they are taking advantage of the opportunities that never existed for prior generations.
Right. Right.
And I think whenever I hear your story, I'm like, man, your mom modeled this to you. You started to duplicate it. You started to look outside of your current resources to gain a better understanding of what was going on in your own life. And I remember you were the one who taught me about triangulation. And that was pretty powerful for me to hear because I've only ever seen it as something that someone who cheats does, not someone who is choosing to cheat and then is being manipulated and coerced by the people who are dependent on them to do something differently.
Right. Right. Yes. That triangulation is something that continues to happen with my ex and one of our daughters. And it's, in triangulation, it's where, the the person that isn't happy with the outcome of a situation that's happening, we're having an argument and he's not happy that I'm not coming back over to his side, pulls in a third party to try to now team up on and gang up on that person to try to convince that person to change their mind. And that has been happening with one of our daughters since all of this started a couple of years ago. And she's still upset with me about the situation. We don't have I would say, a relationship where we're communicating with each other right now. I love her dearly. I've told her when she's ready to talk, I'm here for her. And my door is always open to her. And at some point, I hope that she's ready to take that invitation. But I know that of our 3 daughters, she's the one, her personality is most like mine. So she's very strong and driven and works hard, but at the same time she has this need to take care of people and to save people. And one of the times before when I attempted to leave and I was talking to her about it, her first question to me was, but who's going to take care of dad? And I said, hey, dad's got to figure out how to take care of dad. He's a grown ass man. And what I see happening right now is her stepping into the role that I've vacated. And she is becoming not only his emotional support, but his caretaker.
That's so hard for you to watch, I'll bet.
Oh, yeah. And he's allowing it to happen. And I would say encouraging it.
Well, I do think that relationships like that, like the parent-child relationship, it has so many years to see the highs and the lows and the in-betweens. And as someone who has gone no contact with her own biological mother, and life afforded me some lessons that were very important to the relationship that I have with her. And finally, one day, I realized how little the grievance was serving me, and I needed to let it go. So I'm definitely going to be resting in that hope for you and her. Uh, you know, one of the other things that you touched on was the ability to let go of some of the visions that you had for your own future. And I do think that is probably what is at the core of being able to leave a marriage, especially one that started so young, because I think when you're that young, myself included, I was like, "Oh, and, if we get married this young, we'll definitely make it to 50-year anniversary, and, like, we'll get to do all of these things together," and I had this very much rose-colored glasses on, and, I'd love to hear a little bit more about what that was like for you and letting go of dreams that were so important to you.
Um, again, we got married so young that we thought for sure we would hit that 50-year mark. We were at his grandparents' 50-year wedding anniversary before we got married when we were dating. And we were toasting to them at that point and saying that we couldn't wait to get to the point that we were in their same position. And if there's anything that I've learned through this is that the longevity of a marriage is not a mark of the success of a marriage. And I know many people that have been married for a really long time unhappily. That isn't it. I kind of like to think that our marriage was a success because we have these three beautiful children and a grandson now and another grandson on the way. That that's the success of our marriage. While he likes to think of it as a failure because we're not together now. I like to look at it as a success, but it's done. It's over. It had an ending to it. It isn't something that's going to perpetually go on until one of us dies. One of the biggest things that has really been kind of in both of our faces is something that we envisioned being grandparents and having our grandkids come to our house and spend time with us and take care of them. That has turned out very differently. I am very involved with our grandson, and up until Christmas of this year, when I would go, I would offer him to go with us. That was another like I had to push back on that and stop that, create that another boundary. He can drive himself there. I don't need to be the person driving him down there. So when that happened, he stopped going quite as often. So I'm really involved with our grandson, and he attempts I don't even know that he attempts to be. He likes to talk about how he wants to be more involved, but he doesn't really put in the effort to make that happen. So it definitely looks a little different.
Do you think that he made the relationship with you more important than his experience in his own life?
I do. And I will tell you that two of our kids feel like his feelings and his desire for our relationship to be back together, his wants for that are more important to him than his relationship with them.
I hope they don't feel that way. I hope they don't. God, even though you just told me they did.
Yeah, I do.
That
I do.
sucks.
It does. It really does. Um, and from my position, what I feel like he's lost his control of me, and he has lost the person that took care of everything for him. So when he now says, I still love you. No, you don't. No, you don't. You love the idea of me. You love what I did for you. You love that I took care of everything for you, but you don't love me. So
Mhm,
we need to stop having that conversation.
mhm. God, your story takes me to a place where I'm like, man, the women have just been shuffled around to give care to everybody else. And the purpose of their existence is motherhood and marriage. And it really grinds my gears.
Right. From his perspective, that's what he was taught. Also, right? That's his mom was everybody's caretaker and an overprotective mom and an enabler and very involved with her kids. And she did work outside of the home, but it was her main focus and goal was taking care of everybody. You remember telling him early on in her marriage, I'm not going to be your mom. Want something to eat or something to drink? You need to get up and make it yourself. I don't know that actually turned out that way, but
You tried.
I tried.
You tried with words, then you had
Yeah,
to get down to action.
right.
You know what's so funny about you saying that to him, the whole like, I am not going to be your mom? I've been stewing on this a lot lately. And I'm like, if it is that important to me, I don't have to say it. Like, I just
Mhm.
stop doing it.
Right,
And being able to like really put the reins of control into my own hands and being like, am in control of the misery that I accumulate in life and making sure I
right,
remove myself from situations that make me miserable.
right. Yes, absolutely.
I would love to know, you've already touched a lot on what you've learned through the process of leaving the marriage. Where did you get the courage?
I made the decision that it was going to be me or him. If I stayed, I was committing myself to a life where I had lost myself. And I've seen my mom struggle with a lot. My mom has a lot of chronic pain that is unexplained. My mom has had a opioid issue because of this chronic pain, and I was terrified that I was going to end up in that position. And while it has been very hard for, even though I've attempted to explain it to her several times, my mom does not see the connection with her mental health and her physical health. And so this is where she is now in her life. And there are some things that have occurred from this that like she's never going to be able to roll back and improve on. And I'm terrified to be in that position. So I knew it was either I was going to choose myself and save myself and find myself again, or I was signing up for that life. And so when I got there, it was much easier for me to have the courage to do it.
To be able to see how far down codependency can take your physical state. That's what it took.
Yes. Yes. Your physical and your mental state. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So I kind of want to go into that with you a little bit because whenever I think about the future of me and where I want to end up when I'm like 60, 70, who knows how long I'm going to live for. But I always think like, I want to make sure I take the best care of my body and my mind so that in
Hmm.
the event that I am 70 years old, I am someone who can be taken care of by others, or I just don't need to be taken care of. Like, I still have the ability to take care of myself. And I think it was like developing the ability to care for myself and that becoming the priority in my life, that I feel like shifted my entire experience of life. Do you feel like you started to gear yourself towards a future that was vastly different from the present state that you were in?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm 54 now and I plan on living a very full and active life. as long as, God allows me to do that. I make sure that I am active in trying to eat healthy to take care of my body and, you know, all of the things that I need to do moving forward so that when I am 70 years old, I can be out playing golf or so hiking trails and doing all of the things that I love to do now. I had lunch with a friend today who just turned 70, and she is talking about how her and her husband play golf 5 days a week and they do Zumba and they do all of this different stuff in this community that they live in and how active she is. And that is exactly where I want to be. And I was not going to be there in my marriage. He did not take care of himself in a manner that would afford us the ability to do that, even if we were still together when we're 70. So I definitely plan to be like that, in my future. And the only way you're going to do that is taking care of yourself now. Because if I wait 10 more years to start taking care of it, I'm not going to be where I want to be at that point.
During that 1-year break that you took of self-discovery where you were like, "I'm opting out of this relationship with AP, and I'm just going to do me." Did you
hmm
have any moments where you felt like you just wanted to slide backwards into the life that you were living? And how did you develop the, I'll say, willpower to see that 1-year commitment to yourself through?
I would say in the beginning was excruciatingly hard. I mean, it was hard. It was hard to get out of bed. There were, I think, months where I cried every day. And for people who know me, I'm not a crier. I remember years ago my kids seeing me cry and they're like, "What is happening? Mom's crying. Mom never cries. What's happening?" They've seen me cry more though in the last 2 years. I think it's become normal now. But yeah, I just got really serious about healing and I tried everything that I could find to help, and some things stuck, and some things I tried once and decided it wasn't really for me, and all of that was okay. But it was in the doing that I found the healing that I was looking for. And that's not to say that there weren't times where I was like, God, it would be easier to just go back. Everybody would settle back in, and then I could just keep shoving all of my feelings down, and it would be fine. But it wouldn't be fine, and I knew that. So I never considered going back to that relationship. At that point, I mean, like I said, it took me a really long time to get there. But at that point, I knew I was done and there was no turning back. And, he still won't admit it now, but I honestly think at some point in the future, he's going to say, yes, this was the best thing for me also. Doesn't see it now, but maybe 5 years from now he will. I don't know.
Well, that's for him to figure out. I'm not too worried
Yeah.
about it. I get
Yeah.
why you would be, though. I would also just love to know, were there any areas that you had solidified support for yourself as you were navigating the decision that were really helpful to you at that moment in time?
As I was navigating the decision to leave my marriage,
Mhm.
yes, my sister, who is, I would say, my closest friend, is my rock. And yes, she probably called me twice a day to check on me, just to make sure to see how things were going. If I needed anything, she showed up here. She lives 4 hours away from me. She showed up here for a long weekend right after I moved in, just to check on me and make sure everything was good. She was instrumental. She talked through things with me and was a huge support. I have a very, I would say, strong support system at work. There's several people in my office who have been through the same thing. So there was a lot of commiserating and discussing how things were going compared to how their divorces went in the past. And that was very enlightening for me to be able to share experiences with those people. And then, like I said, I really turned inward and I journaled every day. And it could be something as simple as 5 things I'm grateful for today, or it could have been a total brain dump on with a prompt of journaling, and I would type until there was nothing left. And I used a an app on my iPad to journal called Chronicle because I've got like probably like a 50-letter password on it. Nobody's ever getting in that thing because there's a lot of stuff in there that I did not want sitting in a journal on my bedside table for anybody to pick up. So, as much as I like writing pen to paper, it was reassuring to me that I could say anything I needed to say in that journal, and nobody is ever going to see it except for me, or unless I cut and paste things into the community that I have to share with people.
You secured peace of mind for yourself. I love that.
Yes. So I did everything from, I shared with you in the past, I went to an energy healer who, and this was early on right after everything had happened. And she took one look at me and she was like, it's like people are dropping bombs on you. Like that's what your aura looks like. Like you're at war and people are dropping bombs on you. And that's exactly how I felt. So, and she could see that. I never even told her anything about what was going on in my life at that moment. So I worked with her a couple of times and she gave me some really good advice and tips on inner child work and how to do inner child work. So I spent a lot of time journaling with that, just like check in with your inner child every day and ask her what she needs. And is there a topic that she needs to talk about? And then journal about it. And I did that probably for 3 months. And that brought a lot of healing and introspection and things that I hadn't thought about in years that I could then see had an effect on me and how I was handling things as an adult. I continued to see my therapist, who I had been, at that point, seeing for 5 years. And she's fantastic. Her name is Olivia. And I've often threatened to have tattooed on my wrist, WWOS. What would Olivia say? Yes, she huge, huge help to me. And oddly enough, the day my divorce was final, I sent her an email and I let her know that it was finally done. I thanked her for all of her help because without her, I wasn't sure that I would have ever gotten there. And I haven't felt the need to schedule another session with her since then. She was not someone that I would typically have on, like, sometimes we would have a every 2 week schedule, but it was usually, I would be like, Olivia, I need to see you. Who's canceling? I need to see you. I need to get in there. I haven't felt the need to do that. So, and not that I don't think that, therapy is something that you should continue to do on an ongoing basis, but I definitely think there are seasons and times in your life when you really need it. And then times when you feel like you're okay and you're handling things really well. And I'm sure there'll probably be a time in the future where I feel like I need it again. But right now I feel like I've been pretty good.
I remember asking my therapist once, I was like, "So, how long do people stay in therapy and how long am I supposed to?"
Uh-huh.
She was like, "There's no obligation, Chelsea. You figure it out for yourself." And I was like,
Right.
"All right, good. Just making sure we're following up on each other."
Right. Yeah. So yeah, I reached out and I found a new friend group also, which was also very beneficial for me because it can be very isolating when you leave a long term marriage and you realize that your adult friends were typically the parents of your children when they were in school. And so now at this point, my kids are grown. My youngest is still in school, but for the most part, grown. So trying to make friends as an adult and not having that kind of, friend groups or ability to kind of play in that group of school parents. So I posted something in a women's meetup group in the area that I'm in, and I had over 80 women comment on that post. And we went out to dinner. We started a walking group on Sundays. Went to a wine tasting, just a whole bunch of different stuff. And I met a whole bunch of really cool women in the area and continued with some of those friendships. And that wouldn't have happened if I hadn't put myself out there. If I had just continued to sit on my couch and kind of feel sorry for myself, I didn't have anything to
God, I wanna be you when I grow up.
do.
I really do. I really do. I love the way that you show up so securely and like in a way where you're like, I'm very clear on what I want in life now. And I'm going to make sure
Mhm.
I'm the one who gets it for me. And I
Yes.
absolutely adore that energy from women in general. I think that it's
Mhm.
inspiring and encouraging and definitely doesn't keep me down, lifts me up.
Right. Yes.
Yeah. One of the things that I also wanted to go into with you was infidelity content in general. Was there content that was helpful to you? And was there content that was maybe not helpful to you?
Yes. So the limerence discussion, I actually found that content before I found you. That probably kept me in my marriage an extra year because I found that and I was like, well, maybe this is it. Maybe this explains it. This explains why I can't shake these feelings. Didn't take into consideration that at that point, these feelings had been going on for 17 years. So I kind of like, all right, I'm going to put him aside and I'm going to really focus on my marriage again for however many times this has been at this point. And that year went by and nothing changed. So then I think I found you and that was a completely different path. And I think the healing that you're doing with women who have been in this type of a situation is huge. And for any of the people out there who are like, you're horrible for making this decision, I would say I'm not proud of how this relationship started. I'm not saying that it was right that we started this type of a relationship while we were both married, but it happened. And there have been many times over the years where we completely ended things with each other because of the shame and the guilt that we felt for how this was affecting the people that we loved.
Mhm.
And but that being said, the feelings didn't go away. It's still there. I kept saying to him early on, like, I don't know what our future looks like because I don't know how we operate outside of this love bubble that we've created. So, which could have very well been one of the reasons why he's like, I think I owe it to her to give it one more chance at that end because I was like, I can't guarantee you anything. I'm telling you how, you know how I feel, but I cannot guarantee you anything because up to now, we've been in this little bubble and we haven't had to deal with any of life's ups and downs and real things happening. So we need to kind of figure out what that looks like going
I
forward.
can't wait for you to listen to this episode 5 years from now. I really can't because even whenever I hear you, I'm like, well, I'm just probably going to recant some of this in a couple of years. I think
So,
that I was so perplexed by infidelity content that existed just like I was just in my own little world, just, doing my damn thing. And I saw the infidelity content that existed on TikTok. And I was like, oh my God, this is all fear based. And like, what the fuck?
mhm,
They're shaming people who are already ashamed. Like, their approach is so backwards. Like, okay, I get
right.
it. The goal you're trying to accomplish is to reduce infidelity and I just think you're going about it the wrong way. So let me give it a try. And then I started to, get acquainted with a lot of the terminology that is utilized within infidelity. And I'll never forget the day that I learned what limerence was. And I was out at the pool with my kids or something. And I was like, you mean to tell me that everyone is excusing these very personal relationships with the explanation of a chemical reaction? Like,
Right.
everything on this planet is a chemical reaction. I'm literally comprised of chemical reactions. Like, how are we not doing the due diligence and, like, doing the deep dive and discovering the why we're connected to certain people and why we allow ourselves to fall in love in the first place? And I truly
Mhm,
think it has to do with self-preservation. Like, people will walk around and say that cheating is selfish, and I'm like, "Okay, like, are you that superficial? Like, can you not really dig in a little deeper and see what's going on here? Like, there are people who are trapped by their marriages. It's not to say that marriage is a trap, but like, I think that we trap ourselves in the confines of marriage because our expectations are so skewed with, I'll say, toxicity. Like, I'm going to stay in the marriage because I want a 25-year wedding anniversary. I'm like, that sounds awful. And a really good way to incentivize me to stay in an unhealthy relationship, you
Right.
know?
Right.
Yeah. I know that I've eaten up more time of yours and I showed up late. Ugh, I hate it.
It's okay.
And I don't want to take up too much of your time, but I would like to know, what do you hope will come from sharing your story?
I hope that someone else that is in this same situation that doesn't feel like they have anyone to turn to will hear my voice and realize that there can be another side and that it's okay and that there are people that they can share it with. And some of the women in the community that, and I've talked to some of them on video, but some of them only through text, become very close with and shared very intimate details of our lives with these people. And I'm so thankful for that and for that perspective from someone else that has walked in the same path that I've walked. Because it can be a very lonely place to
Mhm.
not be able to share and discuss that with anyone. The fear of judgment and the guilt of hurting people that you love is huge. And what you find in the community is there is no judgment there. There's no judgment. There are people who are looking to share their wisdom with you and share their path with you. So maybe you could see a different direction. And it's also not people like cheering you on if you're in the middle of an affair and encouraging you to continue to do something that's hurting you or hurting your affair partner. It's people that are like talking, you're hearing another voice of reason. Yeah, I was sharing with someone in the community today that maybe it's unrealistic to put traditional relationship expectations on your affair partner because they do have a family that they're going home to.
Mhm.
And if you're at a point where this is no longer what doesn't feel right or authentic to you, then maybe it's time for you to question, is this the right relationship? Is this the right place or time for you to be in this relationship? And have that open communication with the affair partner and then make a decision that's best for you, not what's best for them.
Yeah. I when I realized how many of my decisions I was waiting for somebody else's input to make, I think that was the moment that I realized how little of my life I was leading and how I was looking to other people to lead my life for me. And that was a real shocker because I thought I had everything under wraps. But once you kind of wake up to that truth, you're like, "Wait, what else comes from other people and not me, and yet I claim as my own? What's happening here?"
Right. Right.
Well, I certainly hope that the people who are listening to this episode, regardless of, I'll say, what label your affair partner has. I know that, in the beginning when you and I met, I could just sense the shame on you. You were like, "He's my brother." And I was like, "Oh, I heard it about 1,000 times. So
You
welcome
were
to
the
the club."
first person that actually said to me, "So what? So what if he is? So what if he is? Why does that matter?"
Well, whenever I saw your communication and I looked at it and I was like, "Oh my gosh, she is probably ashamed that it's her brother-in-law and not somebody else." And I feel like if we are covered in shame, we're almost looking for every single reason why we should be ashamed. And I'm definitely a shame incinerator because whenever I looked at your situation, I was like, okay, so you were both, drawn to the same family. So you had that in common. And,
Yeah.
you guys were each other's safe space inside of I'll say, a real trail of dysfunction.
Mhm.
And I
Right.
just don't see anything wrong with a safe space when everything else is, what's the saying that people say? It's complicated. Let's keep it that way. Well, Grace, I absolutely adore having you inside of the community. And I love that we were able to produce a podcast episode together. It's something that I definitely look forward to. When I first met you, it's kind of amazing that it's even come to be. So thank you, Anne Marie. And thank you, Grace. You guys have really come alongside me and lifted me up when I haven't been feeling too great. So I really
Oh,
appreciate you coming onto the podcast and sharing your story with everybody. I
absolutely.
know that it
Absolutely.
will definitely inspire and encourage people in low places.
I hope so.
Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this podcast episode. We appreciate your support and would love to hear your thoughts on it. If you've made it this far, you're likely someone who is invested in the journey of being the other woman. We understand that this can be a difficult and complex experience, which is why we offer guided coaching to help you heal and move forward. We encourage you to explore the links in the episode description or visit theotherwomanandthewife.com/coaching to learn more about our exclusive coaching program and apply today. Thank you again for your support, and we look forward to seeing you in the next episode.